You guys, the honeymoon is over. We are experiencing just explosions of growth through the entire garden. We're also experiencing tons of vegetables that are ready to harvest. It is an active process every single day coming out here, making sure I am literally harvesting like gallons of tomatoes. It's awesome. I feel really blessed to have such a successful garden right now. But with that, and oh my gosh, I literally just saw this out of the corner of my eye. I swear to God, I have not even seen this. There's a whole watermelon. I just spotted this. Okay, I swear, I don't know where the heck this thing came from because I've walked by this whole area so many times, and we have a little watermelon growing. That is so exciting. That's why I love this time of the year, because you just truly never know what you're going to walk up to. I do wish I had more time to devote to the garden, to have like a consistent schedule on plant maintenance and care. There's a lot of things that really honestly should have been taken care of for weeks on end to make sure that they weren't at the point that they're at. There's some things that I'm worried are a little bit too far gone. It is what it is. That's, you know, the reason why I have such a large garden is because not everything is going to work out. That is also kind of the approach that I usually take, is grow more than you need, because not everything is going to pan out the way you envisioned. That way something works out. So what I'm going to do next year, and also like for the remainder of the season as a part of my plant care, is to develop a routine every whatever day, come out here and do X, Y, and Z, whether that's harvesting, trellising, because with the garden this size and the amount of trellising plants I have, it actually is like a task where I need to come out here and make sure things are latching on. Like, for example, these most of the pumpkins will grab on by themselves, but I'll need to kind of pull up some of those little vines and latch them on. Especially with the tomato plants, as the indeterminate ones continue to grow, I need to continue to make sure that they are secured. There are tons of different caterpillars which are attacking all of our squash, cantaloupe, melons, things like that, to no end. I'm going to just start a routine where I do trellising on one day, harvesting on another day, and plant care and maintenance on another day. I'm experiencing one actually main issue in my tomato garden that is leading to a loss of like about 50% of my tomatoes. So I'll show you what the issue is. I'm experiencing blossom end rot, which is not something I have experienced on a wide scale before. Most of my tomato plants, I would say if not half of them, are experiencing blossom end rot. All this simply means is that it is a calcium deficiency. It'll look like a round tomato, and then eventually the end part, I'm trying to show one that's just starting, it'll just start rotting off. This is the first time I've ever grown in this particular area, so whenever you're growing in a new zone of your garden, you don't really know what to expect. The way that I am fixing this deficiency is by just grinding up eggshells. Is so simple. I mean, most people eat eggs at their house. Save your eggshells, and that's going to solve a lot of your calcium deficiencies. I'm also adding bone meal to my plants. I've never used bone meal before in the garden, but I have heard really good things about it. It's simply just bones ground up. I like to use things that are real elements in the garden, like eggs, bone meal. I'll get into some of the other things I'm using in my garden: fish fertilizer, fish, neem oil. It's just neem oil. I like to use things that are real ingredients in my garden when it comes to helping maintain fertility and just growing an organic garden. So all I'm doing is sprinkling about a tablespoon of eggshells at the base of my tomato plants, along with about a tablespoon of the bone meal, and then I'm going to make sure that it's kind of mixed in there into the soil. Now ideally you could actually just dig out like a little hole too and put it right in there so that it's closer to the root. You don't want to just sprinkle it on top without mixing it into the soil. The thing I like about the bone meal is that not only does it provide calcium, which is what the tomato plants need, it also provides phosphate and a small amount of nitrogen. So you're helping out your tomato plants in more ways than just adding calcium. And the eggshells are just one of the best sources of straight up organic calcium that you can add to your garden. What I will say on my tomato plants and experiencing such a large problem such as calcium deficiency, I am still relatively new to gardening at this scale. I've grown tomato plants a million times and I've never experienced this before, and I feel like you don't know what you're going to get yourself into until that particular season starts to unfold. And that's how you become knowledgeable on certain subjects, is by experiencing problems. And then, you know, later, oh, I do X, Y, and Z to solve this problem. And a new gardener might think, oh my gosh, I need to know all of these things to protect my plants. You're not going to know all of these things until you start to combat and defeat issues one by one and get more confident over time. That is just kind of how it goes. So don't feel overwhelmed and feel like these are all things that you just have to know, because there could be a chance that you just don't even experience some of these problems. I would estimate I have lost about 50% of my tomato crops to this blossom and rot so far. Now the beefsteak varieties are not being as affected, and that just could be because they're all in this back area, and maybe this back area isn't as deficient in calcium. The ones that are the determinate varieties, which it makes sense, they're sucking up most of this nutrients because they're setting all of their fruit at one time. The determinate varieties are the ones that are the most affected by the blossom end rot, which is interesting. The indeterminate ones are going to be setting fruit for longer, so maybe they're just not taking up as much nutrients at once. You know, so that's something to keep in mind as well. I have been saving the tomatoes that have the blossom end rot to use for like fertilizer, basically for my banana trees. I'm just like putting them at the base of the banana trees and things like that, giving them to the ones that are not like molded looking, giving those to the chickens as well. Try to make the best out of the loss, but it is definitely frustrating. And also, now that I'm seeing how much like we're just now starting to harvest, I can't even imagine going into June how much we're gonna have, like how many tomatoes we're gonna have. So I'm about to get a deep freezer because I don't want my tomatoes to go to waste, and I want to make a ton of sauce with them. And that's gonna be one of my next videos, is making a bunch of homemade tomato sauce. With my Berg's buttercup squash, I am not only experiencing blossom end rot, which makes sense because this is where those tomatoes that I had previously experienced blossom end rot, they were in this bed last year. That was the only time I had ever seen blossom end rot in tomatoes, and I just kind of, you know, shrugged it off because I assumed maybe it was just that particular variety and not the actual garden. But I was wrong because I'd never really dealt with blossom end rot before. There's clearly a calcium deficiency in this particular bed as well. The end is rotting off here, and not only am I experiencing blossom end rot, but I'm also experiencing caterpillars to no end attacking the squash, which is to be expected. We experience every single year. And it makes it nearly impossible for me to harvest any type of winter squash. I do have a way to effectively combat the caterpillars and the worms and things like that that are drilling into my squash. As far as garden amendments go, I prefer to use real whole ingredients that make sense to me. That's how I cook in the house. You know, if I don't really understand that an ingredient, like on the package, I'll research it, look it up. If it doesn't make sense to me, I stop using that product. Same thing with the garden. I don't use chemical fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers, because there's a few pros and cons, of course, to both. I just like to use the things that make sense, and it seems as though the real whole ingredients, such as like bone meal, which is just ground up bones, and eggshells, ground up eggshells, fish fertilizer, ground up fish, those things provide more permanent amendments that actually increase the health of the soil and all of the microbial activity in the soil for the longevity. And you don't have to continue to do quite aggressive fertilization processes when you're using these real ingredients, such as a synthetic fertilizer, which the plant typically takes up those ingredients, uses them, and it's not really doing anything for the soil. Anyways, with that said, the issue of worms, cabbage worms, and caterpillars, cutworms, all of that different type of stuff is a completely different battle. The way that I approach effectively saving my plants from that is with something called BT. When I'm talking about pest prevention and fertilization, basically within my garden in this video. Now, as far as pest prevention, I will use BT on my pumpkins, winter squash, everything like that, if there is a real serious problem that I cannot combat anymore. The reason I don't absolutely love BT, and I can't say, oh, this is like the end all be all, this is awesome, everybody should use this, is because of what I was just saying, where only 9% of this is the active bacteria that those pests would ingest, and it basically kills them. It's like poison for those pests. There's around 90% of this bottle, which is other ingredient, air quotes, and although it is definitely approved for organic use, that's what it says, I don't love seeing that. I love knowing exactly what is in those bottles. There are, neem oils, for example, for sale on Amazon, which look like this. It's like a concoction. It says neem oil, then there's like 90% of it is like who knows what. When you can just buy neem oil and make your own concoction, and that is it. So I have looked online to see if I could find like just a straight up BT, and maybe because it's like a bacteria, they have to add more to it to create that like enough substance where you can apply it somewhere. I don't know, but that is my reservation towards using BT. I will say it's extremely effective. In the few times I've used it, it has definitely solved the issue wherever it is. And all you basically do is spray it all over the tops and under the leaves every 5 days. Don't spray it at high noon, and because it will burn the plants. And then within a few days, the bacteria will get into those pest system, like the caterpillars, and it's not going to endanger any type of beneficial pests because they don't feed on the plants. So you don't have to worry about that. But that is my reservation towards BT. So I will be using it today, but I just wanted to kind of say why I'm not super excited about using it whenever I do have to use it, because there have been occurrences in the past where I've grown, like last year I grew a ton of butternut squash. I didn't have to do anything. There was no caterpillar issues, no nothing, and maybe it's just a matter of figuring out which winter squash work for my garden and only growing those varieties. And I'm not going to know until I continue to grow those varieties over time. So the current varieties that are growing are definitely taking a beating from caterpillars and squash. So I'm just getting to know over time. Now, I will also get into neem oil later and talk about what I use neem oil for and everything like that. And you can use neem oil for caterpillar issues. You can. However, it's not going to be as effective as the BT, because BT is like really specifically meant to affect the caterpillars and the worms and things like that. Neem oil is something that has many different benefits outside of just pest prevention, which is something I can definitely confidently say that's an excellent thing to use in your garden. And I personally don't have any type of like, should I use this type of guilt in my garden when it comes to neem oil. So that's just kind of my disclaimer when it comes to BT, but it does work if you're experiencing those issues. So I just spray this all over the tops of the leaves and under the leaves. You'll want to do it in the morning or towards sunset. Do not do applications such as like neem oil, any type of homemade pesticide concoction, or purchased anything like that ever at the hottest time of the day, just as a general rule. I don't even want to breathe in that stuff. I don't know. It's just, you know, it's supposed to be completely safe. I know this. Totally safe for organic use. So if you do use it, don't feel, I mean, I am just somebody who's like a little over the top when it comes to organic practices and like permaculture practices and things like that in my garden. So don't overthink it. If it is something you want to use, don't feel bad about it. I know a lot of people will inject BT in their zucchini, like the actual base of their zucchini plants. Oh my gosh, there's like so many birds that just flew over, to combat with squash vine borers, and I have definitely heard of that as effective. So it is something a lot of people use and swear by, but that's just, you know, I'm an overthinker, I will say. So let's move on to the other stuff. What I touched on a little bit before is chemical synthetic fertilizers. Now, the issue with chemical synthetic fertilizers is you're not really solving a problem with soil health as a whole, in my opinion. You're really just correcting an issue for that individual plant during that individual season, for the most part. Now, there's always going to be exceptions and things like that, but as a whole, it's costly. What is in those fertilizers are things that we had deemed and created to be appropriate for that particular mix, when I find that like letting nature just nature is going to always provide the best results. So working with these real ingredients is going to give you long-lasting results that increase the overall wealth of your garden. And there's no like question, am I adding too much or whatever, or anything like that, because these are things that would typically exist in nature. I swear by, and I absolutely love, Alaskan fish fertilizer. As you can see, this bottle is nearly empty because I've been using it a whole bunch. If you really stay on top of using Alaskan fish fertilizer a lot in the garden season, your plants are going to look so green and have luscious fruits and just so beautiful and healthy. All this is like fermented fish. So, I think most people who have gardened have heard of the whole, dig a hole and bury a fish in the ground, and whatever you plant on top of that is just going to be like wildly successful. So it is kind of the same concept of that, where they're taking like fish bones and fish skins and scales and whatever types of byproducts that was not suitable for us to consume. They're basically taking the leftovers and fermenting that down into a paste for us to use in our gardens. And it's absolutely fantastic. I can't say enough good things about this product because I've really clearly seen the results. Now, the awesome part about fish fertilizer, as opposed to other types of organic methods, which typically is not available for immediate nutrient consumption by your plants. It's a longer lasting, slow release for most of these different types of organic solutions. When it comes to Alaskan fish fertilizer, or just fish fertilizer in general, It is pretty much an immediate solution because it is water soluble and it has been fermented and broke down before you are putting it into your garden. So you're going to have those nutrients more readily available, like as if it was a synthetic fertilizer. So it's like the best of both worlds. You're not using some like concoction that people have created. You're using something that's going to not only improve the health of your soil, but be really quickly available for those plants to benefit from. I use Alaskan fish fertilizer, about 1 to 2 tablespoons for just a gallon of water. And I will tell you, it smells like fermented fish. Every time I'm using the fish fertilizer, you can see like the flies just start coming around for a little bit. It's not too bad. I mean, you're outside and you kind of get used to it. I also, this is my witch's brew. I use neem oil, all in the same concoction, because I don't have time to be applying all these different things in all these different ways. And I will tell you, it works and it's fine. And if you have a problem with it, then all I could do is tell you what works for me. I also add a tablespoon of neem oil, which is basically fully organic pesticide, just from the neem tree. That is the only ingredient in this bottle. It is cold pressed neem oil. And the active ingredient in neem oil, which will protect your plants, is azadirachtin, which acts a lot like the BT that I was just talking about. The plant absorbs the neem oil, whether it's on the leaves or whether you're watering it right into the roots, and it gets in the plant system. Once it's in the plant system, those creatures that you don't want on your plants, they start munching on the leaves, the leaf sucking and the plant sucking creatures. Then it gets in their system and then it kills them, and it kills off future generations, very much so like BT. However, I will say neem oil affects a larger span of pests, like the aphids, mites and beetles, and just things that are not beneficial to your plants, unlike BT, which is pretty much meant just for the caterpillars and for the worms. So that will also be effective, the neem oil, for that problem as well, for the worms and the caterpillars. It's just not as effective as BT. So just kind of, how bad is the problem that you're experiencing? Neem oil is definitely a good approach to continue to apply through the whole season, to continue to give your plants that protection and assurance. It acts as a fungicide, it acts as a bactericide, helps to make your soil healthier. It doesn't hurt beneficial insects at all, or earthworms or anything like that. So I can't say enough good things about neem oil. I add the neem oil with the Alaskan fish fertilizer in here, and you can do both of these applications about once a week. Well, the fish fertilizer I might do once every 2 weeks. Neem oil once a week to every 2 weeks as well. And then I also do Epsom salt, which this is an old bottle of Epsom salt, as you can see. I've used up most of it. So Epsom salt is magnesium sulfate. It's going to help with like more beautiful, powerful blooms in your plants, and greener. That's basically what all of this does. Everything I'm talking about is making your plants greener, more beautiful, helps with the vigor of blossoms, all of that type of stuff. Same thing with the magnesium sulfate, which is just straight up Epsom salt. You cannot use other salts. It has to be Epsom salt because of the magnesium sulfate in it. Make sure if you are purchasing Epsom salt for your garden that it doesn't have any type of oils or anything like that. It's just straight up Epsom salt. So I typically will grab about a tablespoon or so of Epsom salt as well, and I put it in the garden bin. I mix it all together. It's like floating particles like within my little witch's brew when I mix it all together with the hose, that it does get evenly distributed when I start watering it into the plants, because Epsom salt doesn't necessarily need to be dug into the actual soil like the eggshells and the bone meal. So you can kind of water that on top along with the neem oil and the fish fertilizer. That's what I do to save time. I just cannot do individual applications for each individual plant, and I have found that just mixing it all together is just as effective, and there's no problem. None of these things, like the fish fertilizer, is not going to burn your plants. The Epsom salt, it's not going to burn your plants. Neem oil will burn your plants if you apply it during the high noon, but if you're watering it into the root system, it's a lot safer of an option for your plants too. If you were just diluting a neem oil solution solely without the Alaskan fish fertilizer or the Epsom salt, anything like that, I would add a 1/4 teaspoon of organic dish soap to help with the emulsification process, but I have found it's not necessary when I do it like this. Then I just water the base of the plants. We're focused on our pumpkins today, although the whole garden needs this. Typically I'm running around making like 15 gallons of this stuff in one plant protection day, and it gets to be a little bit smelly, I will say. Plants, they really, you can see very dramatic results very quickly from the fish fertilizer especially, and you can see the greenery just really start to develop. There's the phosphorus and the potassium, nitrogen, all of that is in the fish fertilizer. It's absolutely wonderful. And then your plants are more protected as a result of the neem and have a little bit more of a blossom boost because of that magnesium sulfate from the Epsom salt. Next, we're talking about worm castings. Worm castings are also a much safer alternative than using chemical fertilizers. You are really truly benefiting the overall fertility of the soil. They contain essential micronutrients, growth hormones, and trace minerals. So there is so much I could say about worm castings. If you don't know what worm castings are, it's worm manure, however you want to say it. I think most people are familiar with the concept of earthworms equal good for your garden, and that's because those earthworms are working within your garden and they're feeding on organic matter, and then what comes out is their worm castings, and they're basically continuing to fertilize your garden. So that's why they're so important for the garden, and adding additional worm castings to your garden is only going to help benefit the overall health of your garden as well. So I absolutely swear by worm castings. You could honestly just fertilize your entire garden with just worm castings alone and you would be good to go. Now, it is definitely expensive to purchase worm castings online, which is why I would encourage you to research the whole world of vermiculture. Start your own worm bin. It's an excellent way to use up any of your like kitchen scraps and things like that. The worms will quickly break down like a banana in 2 days, or any types of fruits and vegetables that you like, scraps that you are putting in there. It's going to be gone. It's like magic. And then what comes out is basically really close to completely composted byproduct that you can use to help enrich your garden. So I wouldn't necessarily go the route of purchasing worm castings on the regular. I would just start that. That would be like a journey, I would say, to start. In addition to applying just like worm casting straight up to your soil, which you don't necessarily have to work into the soil, you can just kind of put it at the top and rub it in just a little bit, or you can work it into the soil, whatever you decide to do. You can brew worm castings and use them as use it as worm tea, and you can spray it on the leaves of your plants, and it can be just as effective as using BT or neem oil. It will also protect your plants in a lot of different ways. Absolute magic. If you've got the time to brew your own worm tea, which or the materials to do that and want to invest in that, you will certainly see really dramatic effects. I have a worm tea brewer that my mom got me. I just haven't set it up yet. I do intend to start doing that and film some videos on that, and I do intend to film more videos on the whole world of permaculture and raising your own worms and things like that, because I do have a worm bin. I just haven't, I've let it go on the back burner for a little bit, but worm castings is going to be a great thing to incorporate into your garden. Worms and everything that comes along with raising your own worms. There's so many benefits. I hope you guys found this video to be informative, helpful, all of the above. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a like and consider hitting the subscribe button if you don't want to miss more. My name is Shelby, and until next week, bye.